The night was calm in Los Angeles, yet the theater behind the tall glass doors carried a weight that pressed on every breath. Lights blazed, cameras pointed, and the soft hum of whispered conversations filled the air. It was a premiere, one of those moments when the world expected glamour, smiles, and the flawless rhythm of Hollywood. But in the middle of that glitter, someone sat quietly, hands folded too tightly on her lap, trying not to let the tremor show. Ana de Armas was not new to attention. She had walked red carpets before, faced questions, and heard the flash of cameras like thunder around her. Yet tonight felt different. She was supposed to speak. Not just a few words of thanks, but something deeper, something that revealed her own heart. She had written her lines, practiced them over and over in the mirror, but now her voice seemed locked away, hidden somewhere behind the fear of being misunderstood. The crowd around her moved easily. Laughter rose and fell like waves. Dresses sparkled and tuxedos seemed made of steel confidence. She felt small in the middle of it, like a note waiting to be lost in the noise. Then she felt a hand rest gently on the chair beside her. Keanu Reeves sat down, not with the weight of a superstar, but with the quietness of someone who carried no need to prove himself. He didn't speak at first. He simply looked at her, his calm eyes steady, as if telling her without words that she wasn't invisible, that she didn't have to fight this alone. "They want me to speak," she whispered, almost ashamed. "But what if I fail? What if my voice isn't enough?" Keanu leaned closer, his tone soft but firm. "Your voice doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be yours. Sometimes the world doesn't need perfection. It needs honesty." Her throat tightened. She had heard encouragement before, but his words carried weight because they were free of decoration, free of judgment. He wasn't telling her to be better. He was telling her she already was. Then, the stage manager called her name. The moment arrived like a storm breaking open. Her legs refused to move. Panic rose in her chest, heat burning her face. She was about to stand, but her body betrayed her, freezing in place. And then, something unexpected happened. Keanu stood first. Everyone thought he would take the spotlight, that he would lead. Instead, he turned to her, nodded, and stepped aside. He left the path open, as if to say, "This is your moment, not mine." The cameras turned to him, ready to capture another heroic gesture from the man everyone admired. But Keanu simply moved away, silent, his figure retreating into the background. The light that should have followed him shifted toward her. It was terrifying. It was overwhelming, yet it was also freeing. Ana stood slowly, her breath shaking but her spine straighter than it had been all night. She walked to the stage, each step heavy, each step unsure, but real. The crowd hushed, expecting glamour or polished words. What they got was silence at first, her silence. She gripped the microphone, hands trembling. Every thought screamed at her to run. But in the corner of her eye, she saw Keanu standing by the curtain, his head slightly bowed, his expression patient. Not demanding, not pressuring, just present. She took a long breath, her heart racing. Then the first words came, softer than she wanted, but louder than her fear. "I was afraid tonight," she began, her accent wrapping the words in honesty. "Afraid that my voice was not strong enough. Afraid that my story would not matter. But someone reminded me that the world doesn't need me to be perfect. It only needs me to be real." The room fell completely silent. The lights no longer blinded her. She felt them warm instead, like sunlight through a window, and as her voice grew steadier, the fear loosened its grip. The applause came later, but in that moment what mattered most was not the clapping or the flashing lights. It was the stillness she found within herself, the discovery that her voice, fragile as it seemed, could still carry truth. Behind her, unseen by many but noticed by her, Keanu gave the smallest nod, then disappeared from the spotlight. Anna's voice had finally arrived. The applause from the theater still echoed in her ears long after the event had ended. Anna sat in the quiet of her apartment, shoes discarded on the floor, dress carefully folded across the back of a chair. The night had ended with cameras flashing and people smiling at her as if she had done something remarkable. But now, sitting alone, she wasn't sure what had truly happened. She had spoken. She had found her voice, yes, but it felt fragile, like a candle flame fighting against the wind. She feared that tomorrow it would vanish, that the fear would return stronger than before. Her heart carried both pride and doubt, heavy together like two sides of a coin. The phone on the table lit up. One message appeared. It was from Keanu. "You did well tonight. Not because people clapped, because you were real." She read the words again and again, and something inside her softened. He wasn't praising her performance. He wasn't talking about success or failure. He was reminding her that what mattered was honesty. She leaned back in her chair, exhaling a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. But life in Hollywood never slowed down. The next morning, news outlets were already spinning stories. Some headlines called her speech brave. Others described it as shaky, unpolished, even clumsy. She read the words with her chest tightening. Praise felt like air. Criticism felt like stone. Both came crashing down on her shoulders at once. By afternoon, she had closed her phone and pulled the curtains shut. She felt the familiar voice of fear whispering again. "You're not strong enough. You're not ready. You'll never belong here." A knock came at the door. Soft, steady, patient. She hesitated before opening it. Keanu stood there, holding 2 paper cups of coffee, his face calm as always, as though the storms of the world couldn't touch him. "You read the headlines, didn't you?" he asked gently as he stepped inside. She nodded, shame rising in her chest. "They said I was weak, that I looked nervous. Maybe they're right." He placed the coffee on the table and sat down across from her. "They will always say something. It's their job. But weakness is not in trembling. Weakness is in pretending you never tremble. You didn't pretend last night. You stood there anyway. That is strength." She wanted to believe him, but the doubt still clung like shadows. But what if I can't keep going? What if it was just one lucky moment? Keanu's voice lowered, carrying that steady rhythm that made every word feel like a stone laid carefully on solid ground. "Then you try again, and again. Your voice is not measured by one night. It is measured by the courage to keep speaking, even when you're afraid." Silence hung between them, not heavy, but thoughtful. She studied him, wondering how someone so respected, so admired, could carry himself without needing the spotlight. He seemed to live outside of it, even when the world tried to keep him inside. Then he told her something she hadn't expected. "Years ago, I lost my own voice, too. Not the sound of it, the belief in it. People only saw the actor. They didn't see the human behind the name. I had to learn that my worth was not what they wrote, not what they applauded. It was in how I lived, how I treated people. That is where a real voice lives." Her chest ached at his words. She realized then that the man who had stepped aside for her last night wasn't simply kind. He knew the cost of silence, the pain of doubt, and he chose to guide rather than overshadow. That night, long after he left, Anna stood in front of her mirror. She looked at her own reflection, not dressed for a red carpet but in simple clothes, her hair falling loosely over her shoulders. She tried speaking again, not rehearsed lines, not borrowed words, just herself. "My name is Anna," she whispered, "and my voice is mine." Her reflection trembled with her, but for the first time she didn't turn away. The days after her first speech moved quickly, almost too quickly for Anna to hold on to. Invitations came in, interviews were requested, and people wanted her to speak again. But each time someone asked, the same fear returned like a shadow waiting at the corner of her mind. She was afraid the courage she had found on stage that night was only temporary, like a spark that had already burned out. Her manager reminded her of an upcoming press event. "You don't need to say much," the manager promised. "Just a few words about your role, your feelings, and the future. Easy." Easy. That word echoed in her mind, heavy with irony. Speaking had never been easy for her, not when it meant opening herself up, not when every word could be turned into praise or criticism. She wanted to run from it, to hide, but she remembered Keanu's words. "Your voice doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be yours." On the day of the event, the room was filled with lights, microphones, and eyes that seemed to wait for her to falter. She could feel the weight of expectation pressing on her chest. The questions came, one after another, sharp and polished like arrows aimed directly at her. What inspired your performance? How do you see yourself compared to other rising stars? What makes you different from the rest of Hollywood? She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her throat tightened. Fear climbed up like a vine. She could almost hear the critics whispering, "You're failing again. You don't belong here." The silence stretched. People shifted in their seats. Cameras clicked, capturing the moment she froze. Her manager's eyes widened in panic, and for a brief moment, it felt like everything was slipping away. But then she remembered something Keanu had said about weakness, how weakness was not trembling, but pretending you never did. She closed her eyes for a breath and let the silence stay. She didn't fight it. She didn't run. When she opened her eyes again, her voice finally came, soft but steady. I don't always have the perfect answer," she said, her accent wrapping the words in truth. "Sometimes I feel unsure, sometimes even afraid. But I think that is what makes me human. I act not because I am fearless, but because I choose to step forward, even when I feel fear." The room fell quiet, not in judgment, but in attention. People leaned closer, listening. The silence that had once felt like failure now carried weight, now carried meaning. Afterward, when the event was over, she stepped outside into the cool evening air. Her hands were still shaking, but inside she felt lighter. She had stumbled, yes, but she had not broken. A familiar voice came from behind her. Keanu had been there quietly, watching, without making his presence obvious. "You did it," he said. "I froze," she replied, her voice low, almost ashamed. "You froze," he agreed. Then he smiled gently. "But you found your way back. That matters more than never freezing at all." She looked at him, her eyes searching for the certainty she couldn't find in herself. "Do you think I'll ever stop being afraid?" He shook his head softly. "Fear doesn't leave. It changes. Sometimes it becomes smaller, sometimes it becomes your guide. But it doesn't disappear. And maybe it shouldn't. Because the moment you stop feeling fear, you stop growing." His words settled into her heart like seeds planted deep in the soil. She realized then that her journey wasn't about erasing fear, but about walking with it, learning from it, and speaking anyway. Later that night, she wrote in her journal, words that would become a quiet promise to herself. "I will not measure myself by the silence of fear, but by the courage it takes to speak through it." The weeks that followed felt like a storm, a mix of light and darkness that kept changing without warning. Anna's name began to appear more often, not only in magazines but in conversations, in headlines, in the endless stream of online voices that judged with no pause. Some called her authentic. Others said she was fragile, unprepared, not strong enough for the ruthless rhythm of Hollywood. At first, she tried to ignore it. She told herself the voices outside didn't matter, but late at night, When the world was quiet and the glow of her phone was the only light in her room, she couldn't help but scroll through the comments. Words pierced deeper than she expected. She looks weak. She doesn't belong. Why was she even chosen? Every cruel sentence pulled her back toward silence. She began to doubt again, not just her voice, but her place, her worth. It was as if the applause she had once heard was fading, replaced by an endless chorus of doubt. Keanu noticed the change before she even spoke of it. They were walking along a quiet street away from cameras, just two people moving through the calm night. He looked at her with those steady eyes that seemed to carry patience for the whole world. "You're carrying their words," he said softly. She didn't answer at first. Then she sighed, her voice breaking. "I don't know how to stop. Every time I try to believe in myself, I hear them. And the worst part is, sometimes I think they're right." He stopped walking, turning toward her. "Listen to me. The world will always speak. It is what it does. Some will praise you. Some will try to break you. You cannot stop their voices, but you can choose which ones to carry. If you carry every stone they throw, you will sink. But if you leave them behind, you can still walk free." She wanted to believe him, but the weight inside her chest was heavy. "And if I'm not strong enough to leave them behind?" Keanu's expression softened. "Then lean on the ones who see you for who you are, not for who they expect you to be. Strength is not always standing alone. Sometimes it's knowing who to let walk beside you." His words stayed with her long after they parted that night. Yet the test came sooner than she expected. She was invited to a live television interview, the kind that millions would watch, the kind that could either lift her or shatter her. Her manager warned her, "They may ask difficult questions. Stay calm. Stay polished." But staying polished wasn't what she had learned from Keanu. Staying real was, and real meant vulnerable, honest, even if the world saw it as weakness. When the interview began, the host smiled with practiced charm, but the questions quickly turned sharp. "People say you're emotional. Do you think Hollywood is too big for you? Critics believe your nerves show weakness. How do you respond to that?" For a moment, the familiar panic rushed back. The lights were hot. Her heart pounded. Silence threatened to return. She almost gave the safe answer, the polished one. But then she remembered the walk with Keanu, the words about carrying stones. She looked directly at the host and spoke slowly, each word steady. "Yes, I get nervous. Yes, I feel fear. But I don't think that makes me weak. I think it makes me human. And I believe there is strength in showing that humanity. I would rather be honest and afraid than pretend and empty." The room fell silent. The host hesitated, caught off guard by her raw truth. The audience watching didn't hear a polished speech. They heard something rare, honesty without armor. After the show, as she walked backstage, her phone buzzed again. A message. "You carried only your own voice tonight. Proud of you." She didn't need to see the name to know who had sent it. Fame is a strange mirror. It does not always reflect who you are, but what others choose to see. Anna began to notice this more than ever as her days filled with flashing lights, questions, and endless opinions. People spoke about her as if they knew her heart, as if her fears and doubts were theirs to shape. At first, she tried to walk through it calmly, reminding herself of Keanu's words, reminding herself that her voice was her own. But the pressure did not stop. The more she spoke, the more the world demanded. Every sentence she gave seemed to be stretched, twisted, or compared. Every moment of vulnerability was both praised and attacked. She felt pulled in two directions at once. One part of her wanted to keep speaking with honesty, while another part wanted to retreat into silence and never face the stage again. The breaking point came one evening at a charity event. She had been invited to say a few words about the cause, something close to her heart. She had prepared, practiced, and promised herself she would speak with truth. But as she stood before the crowd, the whispers began again. She could see people shifting in their seats, waiting for her voice to falter, almost hoping to catch her stumble. Her throat closed. She stood frozen, her heart racing, her mind blank. Seconds stretched into eternity. She could hear her own breath, harsh and uneven. She wanted to speak, but nothing came. Not one word. The silence grew heavy, pressing down on her like a weight. She saw her manager lower his head in disappointment. She saw the cameras flash, capturing her failure in perfect detail. Her body trembled. She whispered to herself, "Not again. Not now." But it was too late. She left the stage before finishing, her steps unsteady, her chest burning with shame. Behind the curtains, she leaned against the wall, tears filling her eyes. The crowd outside clapped politely, but she knew it was the kind of clapping people gave when they felt sorry for someone, not when they were moved. Later that night, in the quiet of her apartment, the storm broke. She sat on the floor, tears falling without control, her body shaking. "I can't do this," she whispered into the silence. "I don't belong here. I'll never be strong enough." Her phone buzzed. It was another message, but this time she almost didn't want to read it. She was tired of encouragement, tired of trying. Still, she opened it. "You fell tonight. That happens. But listen, Anna, falling is not the end. Staying down is. Tomorrow is another stage, another chance. Don't let tonight be the last word." She stared at the words, her tears blurring them. Keanu had written them, of course, and though she wanted to believe him, part of her resisted. Part of her wanted to give in to the silence forever. But the message would not leave her mind. She read it again and again until it sank into her heart. He was not telling her she had to be perfect. He was reminding her that even in failure, there was a path forward. She closed her eyes, whispering into the night, "Maybe I don't know how yet, but I will try again. I will not let this silence be the end of me." The promise was small, fragile, but it was real. The morning after her breaking point came slowly, with sunlight spilling across the floor of her apartment. Anna sat by the window, her eyes swollen from the night before. She felt empty, but inside that emptiness was also something new, a quiet promise she had made to herself, a promise that she would not let silence end her story. The phone rang. It was her manager, worried, almost angry. "People are talking about last night," he said. "Some are calling it a mistake you won't recover from. But there is another chance, a final chance. They want you to speak at the film festival next week. It's a huge stage. If you succeed, it changes everything. If you fail again..." His voice trailed off. She knew what he meant. The stage could save her or bury her. That night she met Keanu again, in the same quiet cafe where he liked to sit away from cameras. She told him everything, the fear, the shame, the thought of giving up. He listened, patient as always, his hands folded, his eyes steady. "They want me to speak at the festival," she said finally. "But what if I fail again?" He leaned forward. "Then you fail again. And then you rise again. Anna, don't you see? The world doesn't need you to never fall. It needs to see that you rise every time you do. That is what gives people hope." His words struck her deeply. For the first time she realized that her voice was not only for herself. Every time she spoke, every time she trembled but continued, she was showing others that fear and failure were not the end. The day of the festival came. The theater was enormous, filled with voices, lights, and expectation. As she walked onto the stage, her heart raced faster than ever. She remembered her silence at the charity event, the shame, the tears. But she also remembered Keanu stepping aside for her, remembered the small message he had sent the night she broke. Falling is not the end. Staying down is. She stood at the microphone. The crowd waited. Silence filled the room. Her throat trembled, but she did not run from it. She let the silence breathe, and then, with a steady voice, she spoke. There was a time I thought my silence was proof that I was weak. I believed my voice did not belong here. But I have learned something. Strength is not about never shaking, never stumbling. Strength is about standing even when your knees tremble, speaking even when your voice breaks. Strength is not pretending you are fearless. It is choosing to keep going while fear walks beside you. Her voice wavered, but she continued. If you have ever felt afraid, if you have ever felt small, I want you to know, you are not alone. Your voice matters, even when it shakes, especially when it shakes. The hall fell into a deep silence, the kind that carries weight. Then, as her final words hung in the air, the applause began. Soft at first, then rising, filling the theater like a wave. Not polite applause, not forced. It was real. Tears filled her eyes, but this time they were not from fear. They were from release, from the discovery that her voice, fragile and imperfect, had power. Off stage, she saw him again. Keanu stood near the curtain, quiet as always, no spotlight on him. He gave her that same small nod he had given the very first night, the one that told her she had done enough, that she was enough. She smiled through her tears, because she understood now. He had never been there to lift her voice above his. He had been there to remind her she had a voice of her own, and this time she would never let it be silenced again.